This is Glambition Radio, episode number 231, with Dr. Christiane Northrup, Women's Wellness Pioneer. Welcome to Glambition Radio. I am your host, Allie Brown. I'm an entrepreneur, mentor, investor, and mom of twins. I love thinking big, doing different, and exploring ideas that disrupt the status quo, especially when it comes to women, because we are rewriting the rules for leadership, business success, making money, and changing the world. And we're doing it with style. Let's go. All truth begins as heresy. And my guest today has decades of experience in being truly what I would call an iconoclast of her category. And I wanted to have her on the show for a long time, but especially now, because what we are witnessing, ladies, is a crisis of courage. The things that we're feeling and we're worried that no one else is thinking and no one else is talking about and no one else is questioning, we actually are, and we need to find each other. And when I found Dr. Christiane Northrup's Instagram lives, I think it was late in the spring, I cried. Oh my gosh, I cried with relief that, you hear sometimes crazy people questioning stuff. And then you're like, well, yeah, that may make sense, but you're nuts and I'm not listening to that. And I don't want to talk about that. And it's just a whole different area. And then you hear these like amazing, brilliant, intelligent, accomplished women questioning things. That's when I pay attention. And that's why I wanted to have her on the show. Because man, she has put it out there. And we go there a bit on the show today, but you really want to follow her on IG or one of her other channels because she really goes there. The theme in this woman's life has always been questioning the mainstream narrative and learning to honor her own internal wisdom. That is the truth. That is the theme for all of us right now. We are seeking to reconnect with our own truth and inner knowing. This woman has been a visionary pioneer in women's health in particular, with over 30 years of clinical experience as a board-certified OBGYN. She's a 3-time New York Times bestselling author. If you have been, around at all the last few decades, you know her book, Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom. I'm also enjoying her stuff on menopause and just diving into everything else she has right now. Reader's Digest has named her one of the 100 most trusted people in America. She's been featured on Oprah, Today, NBC, The View, Rachel Ray, Dr. Oz, down the line. But man, right now, she has a platform on her own. People are going, wow, you're exactly what I need right now. You're helping me feel this sanity within all this, that there is going to be a light on the other side, but there is a danger right now. There's something we really need to wake up to. And I wanted to bring her to the show to deliver that message to you. My wish is not that you follow what I believe. My wish is not that you follow what she believes. My wish is that this may be the discussion you need to wake up to start seeing things a little different right now in the way they're going. And I will leave it at that. I am going to give a shout out quickly to 2 reviews my team pulled for me from Apple Podcasts. Thank you. The first is from Edna W. The best podcast for women who own a business. Such a blessing to have found this podcast with quality and valuable insights in each episode. Allie is such a positive and strategic influencer for women who want to achieve their own success in today's world. Thank you. And the next is Sandy Wu from Australia. I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. Allie had inspired me to become a coach 6 years ago and showed me ways to think big and differently when I became a mom 5 years ago. Big fan of her podcast ever since the first episode. This is the one I always go back to get my new inspiration, motivation, and intention in my life. Thank you, ladies. And a quick reminder, this show is sponsored by The Trust, the new premier network for women entrepreneurs with 7- and 8-figure businesses. It is a new time, ladies. It's time for a new kind of network. JoinTheTrust.org. I'm actually going to be hosting a special informational call coming up on October 22nd. If you're interested in joining us, first go to jointhetrust.org to learn a bit more about our organization and what we do. And then if it sounds like a good fit, go to jointhetrust.org/private invitation, jointhetrust.org/private invitation, and we will make sure you get information on joining this special closed door session with me online to walk you through the network and what we're doing, what's coming up for 2021, and how you can decide if this would be a good fit for what you want to create next year. We would love to have you. All right. You may want a glass of wine for this one. I can't wait to go here with you and let me know how you like it. I'm especially on Instagram these days. Please drop me a note. All right. Powerful conversation coming up right now with Dr. Christiane Northrup. Dr. Northrup, I would like to know where you are right now.
I am currently sitting at my home office desk, and I am looking at my two harps. One's gold and one is a smaller Dusty Springs. And outside we have that wonderful fog, but I have the flower, these hibiscus, perennial hibiscus, still in bloom. And the river's all, we have this fine fog, but it's a pretty warm day for September in Maine. So that's where I am.
If you ever started a commune up there, I think there's a bunch of us that would show up.
I think that would be a good idea. We have a very well organized Maine organic farmers and growers situation, which is amazing given the short growing season. But there's something about the rocks of Maine, the granite here, that is, it's very stabilizing. It's a Pisces state, a lot of water right on the ocean, and the sun rises here first in the United States. So the energy that the sun takes across the nation begins here in Maine. And I met a geomancer once who came to Maine from South Carolina to build labyrinths and to put rocks in certain configurations as acupuncture for the earth in order to change the energy that flows across the country.
Oh, it's beautiful. I love that.
Yeah.
Let's start, if we can, with well, your book first came out in 1994, The Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom. And I remember hearing about it because I had just graduated school. I went to school in Boston, small women's college, Simmons.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Was in Boston for many years. And, you know, I was privy in that school to have a lot of discussions about women's health. And, you know, we were ardent feminists and how we need to take control of our bodies again. And then your book came out and really nailed that conversation. But you had a long career even before that. Would you mind going back and talking about that and how it led you? I feel there's a theme of kind of questioning things, questioning what's presented to us, questioning the narrative. And when did that start?
That started in early childhood. When my mother was pregnant with my sister Bonnie, I was 5. And at the age of 6 months, Bonnie stopped eating. Now, my mother had been given daily doses of an antibiotic for what, in retrospect, was viral pneumonia. And the whole family went down to Fort Lauderdale, and there's a picture of me on the beach, and I actually remember this because all those little cottages look the same. And once I'm trying to find which one was our family's, you know, I'm sort of lost. And so we went there for her to recover from this pneumonia. She had the baby, and then at 6 months, the baby wouldn't eat and was put into the hospital and eventually died in a pool of her own vomit, with my parents able to look only through a little window because hospitals back then were fortresses around germs. And then later, I actually don't know how many years later, my brother Bill was born, and he also wouldn't eat, but there were no antibiotics and my mother wasn't sick. And she'd go into the hospital to visit. And one night a nurse said, If I were you, I'd get him out of here. They don't know what's going on. Now, having
Really?
already had a child, which would never happen now, never, ever happen now. And so my parents did sign him out against medical advice. Now, remember, we were not an average family. My aunt and uncle, my dad's brother and sister, were medical doctors, and he was a dentist who had run a MASH unit during World War II, repairing the blown up faces of soldiers. So he knew a lot of medicine. And so my parents decided, because they couldn't find any answers, my mother was told that my brother, that he had a defect, like a genetic defect, and he would not be mentally right. And she said she looked at him and she knew that none of that was true. In other words, she had the most important thing, and that would be intact maternal intuition. And they signed him out against medical advice and fed him every hour on the hour with an NG tube, nasogastric tube, that my dad put down. And at the age of a year, he weighed 10 pounds, was very happy, and I had never seen him without adhesive tape on his face, holding the tube in place. They finally found a doctor, Dr. Crump, at Women's Medical in Philadelphia, which no longer exists. And she was a pediatric endoscopy pioneer. In other words, she knew how to put down a fiber optic light and look to see what the esophagus looked like. And she did that. And she said, the esophagus is so eroded that it's going to rupture, and then he'll die from mediastinitis, like everything getting infected in the chest cavity. So let's just pull out the tube and let's see what happens. Let's see if he gets hungry. And after 2 days, he started to eat, and no one knows why. And my mother brought him home at the airport. I remember all of us kids standing around, and my brother was eating a roll, a little white bread roll, and we all started to sob. And then years later, I go to interview at various medical schools because I thought it was a better degree than a PhD. I was a biology major because I loved the study of life, but I never, ever, ever intended to be a doctor. I saw the life that my aunt and uncle had, and they'd have to leave every Christmas, every Thanksgiving very early to tend a patient. And I thought, this sucks. I'm not doing this. And so I thought, well, I'll just go to medical school, and an MD degree is better than a PhD. Honest, that was my thinking. And besides, my father had said to me, at the end of 4 years, you got to be something. You might as well have MD after your name. And I thought, oh, that sounds good to me. And why not? And I had taken a year off after I graduated from college. I was really burnt out. And I finally just went to medical school. And I remember ironing and looking at my mother and saying, when I go to medical school, I'm going to try to find out why doctors don't talk to you, why they don't tell you the truth. When I interviewed at the University of Buffalo Med School, God does this with my life. Who do you suppose is interviewing me? The attending physician of my brother, Bill. And he knew the name because, you as a doctor, you tend to remember your failures. And he said, are you from the Ellicottville Northrups? I said, yeah, I am. And he was sure that my brother would be either very compromised or dead. And I said to him, no, he's fine. And, then I wanted to say, no thanks to you folks. And so I went to medical school. Again, when I was interviewing, my dad ended up in the coronary intensive care unit at Buffalo General with chest pain. And by the time I got home from that particular round of interviews, he had called my mother and said, Edna, come and get me. They don't know what's going on. The IV had infiltrated, meaning his arm was all blown up. He spiked a fever from that. He said, they don't know what's going on. So she went in to get him. He had the chest leads hanging off his chest. The nurses were furious, the usual. And he walked out of there. They didn't even call a wheelchair. Once again, you wouldn't be able to do that anymore because the grip of the medical industrial complex has gotten ever tighter. And he was sitting in a chair with fluid 2/3 of the way up his back because he had infectious pericarditis. The sac around the heart was infected. He had not had a heart attack. and they did not diagnose that properly. That's okay. You can't diagnose everything properly, but he healed on his own. So there I am, ready to go to medical school, fully radicalized about the limitations of the conventional medical system. And yet loving it. On my senior trip to Washington, D.C., I spent my whole time in the medical building of the Smithsonian, transfixed by all the organs in formaldehyde. And, I read everything on Elizabeth Blackwood, the very first female physician in the United States. And, I was really born for it. But I went in there already knowing that this didn't cure everything and that there was a difference between curing and healing. And so when someone wanted to sign out against medical advice, when I was an intern or resident, when someone was disgruntled, the nurses, would call us like we had a big emergency. Oh my God, someone's jumping the fence. And and so I would go down to their rooms gleefully, and I would say to them, okay, so I'm going to talk to you and you're going to tell me what's going on. And I completely understand why you'd want to get out of here. So, just tell me who isn't answering your questions. And I would say, and you can leave anytime. I want you to know you can leave anytime. And guess what? We'll be right here waiting if you come back. And so as soon as you actually talked to a person like a human being,
yes,
most of the time they stayed, because you would tell them what you knew, what you didn't know, what was going on, where the care was supposed to be going, and so on. And then they would stay. But I also always loved the idea that you could leave, just like now. I love the idea that so many people are homeschooling. Mm-hmm. They are leaving. They're leaving the sort of mainstream narrative that says you need a PhD educator in order to learn. You need a doctor in order to be healthy. You need an authority figure telling you what you can and can't do in order to have a successful life. And so then at the end of my residency in OBGYN, and by the way, I cried when I first saw a baby born, and it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And I knew that's what I needed to go into. The nurse was yelling at the med student because he had let go of the umbilical cord. And that thing is like a tiny fire hose, and it just sprayed blood all over the delivery room. And the nurse is yelling. And I'm thinking, this is a holy moment. There is no place for a nurse or anyone to be yelling at anything. There's no place for this. But then I began to really observe how birth was done. And back then, it was treated as a surgical procedure. So, a woman would be crowning, the baby would be coming, and we would be rushing around trying to get the surgical drapes on her body with the birth canal as the operative site. And then, you'd be putting betadine all over everything and shaving all the pubic hair. And, those are the sorts of things that right around that time, Suzanne Arms wrote a book called The Immaculate Deception. And it was you were talking about Simmons College and being feminist and all that. It was a time of great questioning. Why are we needing to shave all the pubic hair? Why do we need to give enemas? Why do we need to give birth in the dorsal lithotomy position? And that position is just you're lying back and your legs are in the air. And here you are, you're trying to evacuate something from your pelvic bowl. We don't exactly poop in that position. So why would we birth in that position? So it was a time of great, great questioning. And then the end of my residency, my cousin called me and said she was healing her fibroid tumors with a macrobiotic diet. And I was really intrigued and open because my dad had brought us up on organic food. We had a compost heap. If you dropped anything on the ground, he'd say, it's fine to eat it. Let the earth pass through you. Then you'll be immune to everything. And because we'd been brought up on Adele Davis and we'd been called health nuts and all that, I thought, well, if somebody has some intel on how to shrink fibroids with diet, I'm all ears. So I met Michio Kushi And I sat with him during his consultations. I was astounded by what I saw. Many, many people would bring in huge charts. They'd been given up for dead by the medical profession. And many of them got better, and they got better relatively quickly, because when you change everything in your diet, it doesn't take long for the body to respond. And the same with when you properly take care of the soil, then it gives you back what you need. So, you're changing the terrain, and therefore the body responds. And so I began to have a lot of patients from the macrobiotic community in Boston, and they would come to Maine to see me. And I understood what they were trying to do with their diet and with the quality of their blood. But even then, I saw that if there was unresolved emotional issues, it didn't matter what you were eating. You were still going to have to address that. So, for instance, I began to notice that women with chronic pelvic pain, if you took a full history, very often they had been sexually abused and hadn't told anybody. Now, remember, this is long before the Me Too movement. And my colleagues would say, your patients are nuts. We only see normal women. So when the Harvey Weinstein thing happened in October of 2017, I was turning backflips. I was like, oh my God, finally vindication, instead of, your patients are all crazy. Or, I'd say we store our pain in the second chakra in the uterus. And my colleagues would say, oh, good, another reason to do unnecessary hysterectomies. But I always, that whole time in conventional medicine, loved my colleagues, loved the nurses, loved the whole thing. I just felt like there's a missing piece here. And why don't we bring that intuitive, feminine, right brain piece? Because that's what's missing. I'd go around the wards in med school up in Hanover, New Hampshire at Dartmouth, and I'd talk to patients after hours. And the oncology patients, the one with cancer, they would tell me when and if they were going to die. You just sit with them. And I found that if you sit with people, they'll tell you why they're sick. And then you could put the pieces together. And then at Women to Women, we worked with an incredible woman named Patricia Rice, who did a practice called Therapeia, where she would do in-depth work with our patients. And then we would get together and she'd talk about what they had gone through and the rapes and the this and the that. And then I would put it together with what was going on with them in their physical bodies, because we have built in this culture an enormous mind-body split. The National Institutes of Mental Health is not even in the same government agency as the National Institutes of Health. And then we have, P6 in our hospital was the psych place, and then the operating room was in the basement. So just this mind-body split built in that I knew was wrong. And by the way, let's circle back here. Years later, I talked to my dad through a medium. He dropped dead on a tennis court when he was 68, playing with my mother. And when I'd been a high school senior, I was reading a book on reincarnation. I read all of Edgar Cayce and Angels and all that, teenage years. And he looked at me and he said, someday a blood vessel is going to rupture in my head and I'll just float out into the universe. And that's exactly what happened when he was out playing tennis with my mother. He said, my head, and dropped dead. I was a second year OBGYN resident at my Saturn return, age 28, in Boston at the time. And when I first heard the news, before the grief struck, I just laughed. I said, Dad, you did just what you said you were going to do. And that's the kind of larger story that we all need to bring to the table if we are to truly understand what's going on with our health. It is so far beyond vaccines. It's so far beyond antibiotics, everything we've been taught. And when we understand that, then we have the keys to our power, to our inner wisdom. But that involves something that most people have been talked out of, and that is taking responsibility for your decisions, not waiting for an authority to tell you.
Yeah.
What is your very first impulse? When someone tells you something, because what I've found with people is if their first impulse is hell no, but they do it anyway because of societal pressure, those are the people who really beat themselves up later.
It is,
I knew better, right?
Yeah. I think for me, the first time I really tuned in to my body and saying no to specific things was when I had my twins. And I have 7-year-old twins. And got pregnant naturally and a bit quickly, by the way, with twins. So I was doing something right. It was healthier than I realized at 41. So that was 7 years ago.
Right.
Was treated, of course, as a geriatric pregnancy. That age.
These words. I mean, these words that we use.
It just kills me. Yeah.
It's so bad. So, elderly prima gravida. That's somebody who's 35. When they have their first kid. I also like, after we do a tubal ligation, sometimes the surgeons would, wheel the woman back into the recovery room. And I remember one guy saying to the woman, "You're sterile." It's like, get out of here. Oh my God. It was like a lot of my work is reframing the words, right?
Yeah. And we were being presented with all these things. And I mean, it's very overwhelming. It's like, well, we're going to do this and you're going to do this and this. And then I started declining things, and you could tell they look at you like you have two heads, but I'm like, yes! No, I'm not good with that. And because I knew, Dr. Northrup, I knew in my body, because you really start to feel your body when you're pregnant. That's when, before when it's you, it's kind of like, yeah, whatever. And then I was like, I just knew. And that could be a whole show on that. But is this really, if there was one issue, especially for women, that ties into your book and why you wrote it, and also tying into the things we're feeling right now, is it the knowing?
Yes, it is. It is the gut sense. It doesn't come from the intellect. In fact, the people with the most mainstream education are the ones who have the most trouble with what's going on right now, with questioning the narrative. It is the people close to the earth. It's the ones who trust their gut. Those are the ones who are leading the way. Like you had that wake-up call. That's actually why I went into OBGYN. I thought, this is a time. This is such an open moment. This is when women will do something for their health because it involves someone else. They might not do it for themselves because we've been told not to value ourselves. But when they're pregnant, they'll do it for the baby, and then their mother bear instinct comes up. And so I would say it's that inner wisdom. This body is a tuning fork to truth. And if you have maintained your own intuition and educated yourself, then you have access to that barometer, that instant ping. It's generally, by the way, it's the first thing that comes into your head. I've learned this from the medical intuitive Julie Ryan. You ask a question, and the first thing that comes into your head is the right answer. And that's when the left hemisphere comes in, goes, "Are you sure? Where are your studies?"
Yeah, it goes, no, that can't be right. Yeah.
Yeah, show me the facts. Show me the facts. Where are the 10 studies? I mean, my whole career has been that, having the mainstream media question everything that I ever said. Now, what's interesting about now, so the first edition came out in 94. Back then, honest to heavens, my editors at Random House questioned everything. My colleagues questioned everything. When I did my PBS specials, I swear I had to come up with 8 times as many studies to get those specials done as a guy would. They could say anything. I had to provide them with, so much backup data. But here's the thing, everybody. I really want your audience to know this. There is no backup data that is going to be available to you in the moment when the body goes no. You'll get the data later, like what's happened to me now. This is funny. So I just sent in the copy-edited manuscript for the totally revised and updated edition of The Wisdom of Menopause, which was my second big book. And this time, and I sort of gird my loins. I prepare for the battle. Okay, now they're going to question everything I've said about Gardasil and mammograms. Nothing. It's like the book went from editorial to copy edit like immediately almost. And I go through the copy edit process and I'm waiting. I'm waiting to be challenged on everything that isn't mainstream. Nothing. Yeah. It's like, I guess maybe I just wore them down. I like to sometimes when I listen to Elton John, that amazing movie, Rocket Man, it's his life story where he just sings, I'm still standing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I have had so many naysayer colleagues who are dead.
That was a great book too. I have to say I picked that up as some of my symptoms, have started. I'm 49 now. So
yeah.
It was really helpful. I can't believe you didn't get pushback on that, man. So don't you feel, I've been going through this, we shared in the pre-chat, I shared, and I'm going to share this with everyone now, that I was going through a real tough time this year with everything happening. When this all first happened in the spring, and, we're all kind of like, we just do the surface. We're like, okay, I'll do my part. Let's shut down. And
we're all like, yeah, this is no problem.
Oh, we were all kind of bonded. Like, we're all going to bake. I'm on, live DJing with DJ Nice. It's a dance party on Instagram. I'm like, this is fun. Right?
Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
We're all together. And then it kind of ended, and then it came back. And then you start reading, and I mean, stuff you don't even need to dig for. If you connect the dots, even what you're seeing on the surface.
Oh,
I started to get,
that's right.
For the first time, I would say in my life, I felt fear like this when I started to see the dots being connected, and how I think what scared me more was not this whole virus thing. Was scaring me more that no one was questioning it. And that is when I got terrified, because I started to say, like, is no one else even just questioning what's going on? And is there anywhere else to get information? We're not even being given information. Is this, I don't understand. This isn't lining up. And I'm open to ideas, but there was no discussion. And then I came upon your little Instagram lives, which I know you just kind of started during the lockdown as a fun little thing. And then, and they're still going. So can you give kind of a meta view of, there's this beautiful side to all this, though, that I think I tapped into, especially when I started to follow you again, because I'm like, oh, this is that time everyone's been talking about, where there's an elevation happening, there's an awakening happening. And can we talk about that for a minute, and what we can do right now to stay grounded?
Yes.
There's so many places to go. I'm sorry to load all that on you, but
there really is. But okay, so what happened is on April 4th, 2020, which is 444, there was a global meditation, and I wanted my audience to understand the power of a whole bunch of us getting together, like millions on the planet, and meditating at the same time, getting into what's called cardiac coherence, where the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems are perfectly in balance, which creates this wonderful cardiac variability. On a fetal monitor, by the way, when you see that pattern, all is well with the baby. But we also know that with a human, when you're in that state, your electromagnetic field spreads out from you as power, and we all affect the Schumann resonance of the earth itself. So the Schumann resonance is the electromagnetic field of the earth, and it has been measured with what's called the Global Coherence Project, where there are sensors all over the world that measure the effect of human emotion and mass events on the earth herself. So I wanted everybody to know to do that. And then I thought, well, I'll just keep this up for 40 days. 40 being a very symbolic number. It's the time it takes generally to really nail in a new habit. And it's symbolic in that, Jesus spent 40 days, 40 nights in the desert. And I mean, no, I don't think Jesus did not spend 40 days and nights in the desert. Maybe he did, but the Israelites spent 40 years. And, and if you talk to someone who really knows that history, it's not all that far from Egypt through the desert. It wouldn't have taken 40 years, but 40 years is symbolic of 2 generations. And that's how long it takes generally to get slavery out of the mentality. So anyway, I thought, well, I'll do 40 days. And so I just checked in, and I already knew one of the things. Remember, I told you I was fully radicalized when I went into medical school. So I knew about the J.D. Rockefeller and the Flexner Report and shutting down all the women's medical schools and the homeopathic medical schools and the naturopathic medical schools.
Tell us about that. We don't know. We don't know this.
Okay, that's in 1920. John D. Rockefeller came out with the Flexner Report. And what he was doing, he figured out how to make drugs from petrochemicals. He was the founder of Standard Oil and the oil business. And he founded a cartel, like no competition whatsoever. And it dawned on him that you could make patent medicines. You cannot patent a naturally occurring substance. All right. So you can't patent herbs and you can't patent vitamins. And the only way for drug companies to make money is to be able to patent their product. So thus were born patent medicines. And what Rockefeller did to drive out all the competition was to systematically offer large amounts of money to the doctors who taught only pharmaceutical medicine. That's conventional medicine, and that became the gold standard. And everyone else was a quack. So if you read, and then, Rockefeller did just what Bill Gates has done, which is create the Rockefeller Foundation and do Rockefeller Center. And so everyone thinks that the Rockefellers were these incredible philanthropists. But it's actually something that I would question. And it's not hard to, they've also got the agenda of the pandemic planning and all the rest of it. So I knew that every time there was a breakthrough in healing, like with vitamin C, Linus Pauling wins 2 Nobel Prizes for his work in biochemistry. But the minute he starts to study vitamin C as this amazing antioxidant that has been used to cure so many things, he's called a quack. And everyone decides that he is losing it, you see. And he said, what we're not up on, we tend to be down on. And my whole history in holistic medicine has been one of watching my back, because when you suggest something other than a mainstream conventional drug or surgery, then you're called a quack. And I was listening to Dr. Andrew Saul, an orthomolecular physician, talk about vitamin C and the fact that at the beginning of this pandemic, he sent tons of it to China. And it really works beautifully. You have to give enough, and you got to do it early. You don't wait until someone's really sick. I remember in the beginning of this whole thing, I had a friend that I took to the doctor several times. And, and I was wondering, okay, so how do you get tested for this thing? And they would say, you can't get tested. We're only testing those who are sort of near death. And I thought that's odd, because how do we even know how many people have this? We know that some people are sick, but we certainly don't know how many have this. And, also in February, I certainly got whatever this thing was, thought I was going to cough up a lung for a week there, a couple weeks, but, got better. So anyway, that was the Flexner Report. So I knew about that. And so there were many, many things about this that were completely suspicious to me. So for instance, there's a guy, Dr. Sales. I remember watching a YouTube video of this physician at a New York hospital, a intensive care physician whose specialty was respiratory things. And he did this YouTube and he said, this is not anything I've ever seen. People are coming in as though they have high altitude pulmonary edema. They're not coming in needing a ventilator. They need oxygen. And it was a plea to everyone. Could we please rethink what we're doing here? I think these people need oxygen. They don't need to be on a ventilator. Then his YouTube video was censored almost immediately. Then we had the doctors out in California who run a bunch of clinics, and they're talking about that the numbers are all wrong. And then we had, and I can't remember his name, the physician in Minnesota who'd been named the Physician of the Year and was a family doc in Minnesota, also a senator. And he, like so many of us, had been filling out death certificates for years. And suddenly he's being asked to fill out the death certificates in a whole new way, like no matter what happens. I mean, and we in medicine, we begin to make jokes about it. Oh, I get it. You jump out of a plane, then the parachute doesn't open. That must be COVID. You died of COVID. So suddenly doctors are being pressured to put down COVID as the cause of death, no matter what the person had. So that begins to be all around the airwaves, and that gets censored. And then in my own medical literature, I'm noticing that no matter, it's like there's no other subject suddenly. And it's all about COVID, all about COVID, all about it didn't make any sense to me. And when I listened to Andrew Saul, and I'm going to go here at this time because I have on my own little call to the troops. There's an interview where he's talking about how effective vitamin C is and was. And his interviewer says to him, well, why don't people know this? Why isn't this more widely available? I mean, because it's cheap and it's effective and all that. He looks at the guy and he goes, Satan. I thought, wow, that's as good an answer as any that I have ever heard. And then I remember right around, I think it was March, maybe April, President Trump mentions hydroxychloroquine. Okay, we all know that drug. That's been around for 60 years. Anyone who's ever been going to a place where there's malaria gets on that stuff. You know, it's generic now. So the average cost for one whole course of it is $12. And he mentions that he's taking it. And the press goes crazy. Like, this is the most dangerous thing. And that's just, I can't believe that he's saying this and he's putting everyone in danger. And just a basic doctor thing. You go, really? Because this has been successfully and safely used for 60 years. What's going on here? And it went on and on and on like that. I listened to Dr. Dolores Cahill of Dublin, Ireland, a world-renowned scientist. And she says, the good news is that the virus has been through the entire population now. Death rates now will go way down now, which they have. And then the next thing you know, the mask mandates come out. It's like the time for that, if that had even worked, if there was any data to support that, then we should have been doing that in the very early days. But suddenly, the horse is long out of the barn, and now we're being told to wear masks. And then people are being, if you question that, I remember trying to post a post about the effectiveness of masks by Russell Blaylock, a renowned neurosurgeon who knows a thing or two about breathing. And Facebook wouldn't even let me post it. And then my friend Joe Mercola, who always has had very, very well documented great stuff about health, his entire platform was removed from Twitter. You can't even post anything from Joe Mercola on Twitter. And then my colleague Del Bigtree, who runs the High Wire, who was the producer of Vaxxed, he gets deplatformed by Facebook. And suddenly the censorship of the kind of things that I have been saying in my profession for 40 years, suddenly it's all censored. And so what happened was I decided to keep my little daily chat going because it was helping people who were also feeling that cognitive dissonance. Like, wait a minute, what I feel is going on. Everyone's telling me it's not going on. It's the Wizard of Oz. Pay no attention to that man behind the screen.
Yeah.
And so you begin to doubt yourself. Wait, am I crazy? Like, here's another one. All right, this virus is so dangerous that we have to wear a mask. So, your very breath, your very presence, you got to stay 6 feet away and wear a mask. That's how deadly it is. Oh, but to get the sample for the test, we need to stick a swab way up your nose to the cribiform plate right at the blood-brain barrier. Like, what's that about? You ought to be able to just spit on a thing. Nope. And then I noticed the other thing happening. behind the scenes, suddenly more and more vaccine mandate laws were being attempted. And so Massachusetts enacted a law that everyone from 6 months of age onward, if they were in daycare or in anything that received public funds or even private, they needed to get a flu vaccine, even though we know that the flu vaccine does, in some people, what's called pathogenic priming, which increases their risk of a second respiratory virus by a factor of 4.4. So giving everyone a flu vaccine at this time increases their risk for COVID. And again, RFK Jr. on his Instagram feed and Children's Health Defense, it's either .org or .com, Children's Health Defense, he's got all kinds of amazing stuff there. Then we had the Judy Mikovits documentary, Plandemic, and then Plandemic Indoctrination.
Mm-hmm.
And then you begin to go down that rabbit hole. And,
you're laying it all on. I told you to go there, but like, this is like take it easy on everybody. Oh my God. You're like, throw like everything. It's like there is no Santa Claus. And
yeah. And here's the thing. Okay. So, I wrote a book called Dodging Energy Vampires. And again, I didn't know that was predictive programming. I just knew that I'd had a run in with these characters, and in the hospital, they were called Cluster B, and they made everyone's family crazy, and that 1 in 5 people has this personality disorder, and I finally decided I got to write about this because these people are driving regular folks crazy. And little did I know that I was actually writing a book about how the whole mind control agenda actually works. Now, you can see it in an individual. If you've ever been married to a narcissist or a borderline personality, or you have a sister or you have a brother who's a sociopath, then you know what it looks like on a personal level. But this is on a global scale at this point. And what I talked about in the book is the reason people don't know about this is, first of all, these characters are very intuitive, but they have what I call malignant intuition. They know exactly what you want to hear. Oh, you're the most beautiful person who was ever born. Oh, only you can help me. No one else has been able to help me. And they know what you've always longed to hear. They know your unmet needs. And every empath healer I've ever met has had run-ins with these characters. Well, now they're running the whole mainstream media. And what happens when you wake up to this, you get cognitive dissonance, which feels terrible. Like, oh my God, you mean I can't trust my doctor? You mean what they've been telling me all along? Like that this Gardasil vaccine that they're mandating for kids in these various states, what do you mean that causes menopause in 17-year-olds? What do you mean that could cripple my daughter or my son? They told me it was safe and effective. They told me that my kid wouldn't be the one to get cancer. And now you're telling me that it actually might increase the risk of cancer? You must be wrong. You must be nuts. My doctor would never do that. And the sad truth is, your doctor's doing it every day. And I wish this were not true. But I look at my profession and I wonder, when did your pineal gland get calcified? Like, why can't you see this? Like, really?
For the people now listening and are horrified, and this may be some of this like new information for them, or they're still taking this in, where do they start? I just want to make sure we end somewhere that they can. Where do we feel like we have control?
Here's the beauty of all of it. Enormous light is pouring in. This is the great awakening that I use the term because it's an astrological term. That's how I'm using it. And it's the end of the old world order, the age of Pisces, and we're moving into the Aquarian age. So what's really happening, the way to see this is the darkness that has been here, the dark controllers that have controlled people on Earth for centuries. It's now all coming to an end. And it's just out here where you can see it. So the news is really, really good if you can just hang in there. Because if you look at the Federal Reserve and the fact that they've kept people in financial slavery with the fiat system for just creating money. The Federal Reserve was just 5 families. It's not federal. And they just print money and then lend it to the government and charge interest. That's called usury, and it's illegal. That's the kind of thing that's now coming up for people. So I want people to understand that we're at the darkest time, but really, it's always darkest before dawn. And I think that what we're going to see by next spring is the beginning of a whole new world. So the end of, let's say, GMOs, the end of petrochemicals in our food and water, the end of fluoride in the water, the end of 72 mandated vaccines by the age of 18. People are waking up to who we really are and what our power really, really is. Humans are made in the image of God. We have enormous power. So what I would say to people, there's two kinds of people who are listening. There are those who want to know what's going on. So for vaccines, I would recommend reading Dissolving Illusions by Suzanne Humphreys, who was a nephrologist here in Maine who began to question the vaccine narrative. And then for others, you can go to plandemicseries.com and just look at those two very well done documentaries about what is the agenda behind all of what's going on, including planetary vaccination. And I won't get into what that is supposed to do because that would put you all over the edge. But I also want you to know that it doesn't take more than 1% to 3% of people vibrating at a higher level. And by the way, neutrality is a high vibration. And truth is a high vibration. Love is a high vibration. Shame, scorn, judgment, that's a lower vibration. So if we can stay at that higher vibration, like where I started with the Great Awakening on 4/4/2020, everyone vibrating in that place where their heart is open, where they're praying for the best of the earth and so on. That is what everyone can do at this time. Now, I'm one of those people that, just because of my background, have had to learn the agenda and what's really going on. But there are those of you who are going to be way too triggered by that. So don't do it. Don't do that. In fact, what would be better for you is to lie down on the ground every day. A sidewalk works. I just learned pavement works. I use the grass in the back of my house, a beach, or just sit with your feet on the ground, barefoot, or hugging a tree. Don't do a pine tree. You'll get sap all over you. I've learned that the hard way. Or just wear something that you can throw away. But leaning against a tree, hugging a tree, putting your feet on the earth, this decreases cellular inflammation. 20 minutes, 20% decrease in cellular inflammation. Please understand that there's so much that you can do. Zinc, vitamin C, quercetin works as well as hydroxychloroquine. You can get that from grapefruit peels, orange peels, and you can just sort of boil up the peels and inhale the steam from that. That'll give you a nice, it's called a zinc ionophore, where the zinc goes into the virus and deactivates it. So there's so much that people can do. Oh, and I would say the number one thing that everyone needs to do, which I've done years ago, is just do not listen to the mainstream media. It's fear porn. It is designed to keep you afraid. And when you are afraid, you are powerless. And fear is the lowest, slowest vibration that we have, and that will hold us back from moving into this new world of universal freedom and love and prosperity and light. So you stay away from the mainstream news, mainstream media, because it is curated to scare you to death. And I watched this funny meme of an Amish guy with his horse, and they said, "Why doesn't the Amish community have COVID?" And he goes, "Because we don't have television."
That says it all.
Doesn't it? I know it does.
That really does say it all. And to everyone listening, I know we've thrown a lot at you today over the last hour. Like, this was like, do you remember in The Matrix when they hook up that big cable to the back of Neo's head and they're just, they're pumping him his information and he's like, oh, I like it. I want more, I want to echo what you said, because when I started going down the rabbit hole a bit, there were times where I just said, okay, that's all I can take today.
Yeah.
And for those of us who are sensitive, and at the same time, mamas, take into account you've been balancing your family and homeschooling and working at home. I mean, the women, what we're carrying right now is so much. And then putting this on top of it sometimes is just, it's so overwhelming. So everyone listening, take this in, but open your mind to the beautiful part of all this, which I'm so glad you went there. Otherwise,
No, you can't. No, if I didn't think that this has a massively happy ending, I wouldn't do the work, and I couldn't do the work. So
yeah.
what I'm doing really, my whole work right now is simply being a midwife for the planetary rebirth. And I know that labor can be really gnarly and painful. So that's why I'm just standing by.
I love it. Thank you for standing by. It helped me so much this year. That's really where I got, I think, just tuned in where I needed to be again. I'd lost that a bit, and I got plugged in. And so I want to encourage everyone to go follow you. They need to pick up the new version of Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom. And any last words of advice for all the women listening around the world?
Yes, the one thing that they can do every day that's so simple and so effective is breathe in through your nose and out through your nose. And mouth breathing is a stress response. So the minute that you breathe through your nose, even while exercising, breathing in fully through the nose, out through the nose, that will completely reset your parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system and begin to digest stress hormones. So let's say that you hear some news that scares you. And by the way, I really curate my news very, very well. I mean, when I hear someone saying it's the end of the world and they're going to this and they'll have us hooked up like the Matrix and all, it's like, nope. I'm going to go to one of those channels where I know that the ending is happy. But there's no question that this time has split families from family members and so on. So just take a breath in through your nose all the way in and hold it, and then all the way out. And if you just do 5 of those breaths like 3-4 times a day, it will help you enormously. That plus putting your feet on the earth.
I love this. Oh my gosh, I want to lock you up for 3 days and record like the sessions, the Dr. Northrup sessions, and then we put it on an uncensored platform, and let me know if you want. But I love this. Okay. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for doing what you do. Thank you for holding the light, but with such intelligence and wisdom. And wisdom, I think, is your life theme. I think the answer to all our questions is the inner knowing. And thank you for shining that light. We really appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take care.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Glambition Radio. If you enjoyed the show, make sure you subscribe so you automatically get new shows every week. And I'd love if you left us a review. We are on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and other platforms. And I'd love to hear from you. Come join the conversation online. You'll mostly find me on Instagram, but also on Facebook, Twitter, and more. Just head to allybrown.com. You will find them all there. And you can also learn about upcoming opportunities to meet in person. Glambition Radio is the elevated conversation for women leaders, and I'm honored you've tuned in.